February 14th, 1944, Rabaul, Solomon Islands. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanimizu yanked his Mitsubishi Zero into a desperate climbing turn as a dark blue shape screamed past him at a speed that defied belief. The aircraft had gull wings bent like the wings of a seabird, a massive radial engine that made his Zero look like a toy, and it was accelerating away from him as if he were standing still. Impossible, he whispered into his oxygen mask, watching the American fighter climb at angles that should have caused a stall. His Zero, once the terror of the Pacific, could not follow, could not catch, could not escape. The aircraft that had just blown past Tanimizu was the Vought F4U Corsair, powered by the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine, producing 2,250 horsepower at war emergency power. With its water injection system engaged, that figure jumped to over 2,800 horsepower, more power than any single-engine fighter in the world. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. The Corsair weighed 14,000 pounds fully loaded but possessed nearly twice the horsepower of the Zero. Power-to-weight ratio, the fundamental equation of fighter performance, favored the American aircraft by margins that Japanese engineers had not thought possible. Maximum speed of 446 miles per hour at 26,200 feet made the Corsair one of the fastest fighters in the world in 1944. The Zero's top speed of 331 miles per hour meant the Corsair was 115 miles per hour faster. In aerial combat, that speed differential was the difference between life and death. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots would prove even more devastating than the performance statistics suggested. Their advantage was gone, their tactics obsolete, their survival unlikely. The story of how the R-2800 engine transformed the Corsair from a troubled design into arguably the finest carrier fighter of World War II began 3 years earlier in the drawing rooms of Vought aircraft. In 1938, the United States Navy issued a requirement for a new carrier-based fighter. The specifications were demanding. The aircraft needed to exceed 400 miles per hour in level flight. It had to carry 6 machine guns or cannon. It required sufficient range for long patrol missions. Most critically, it had to operate from aircraft carriers with their short takeoff distances and challenging landing conditions. Vaught's chief designer, Rex Beisel, faced a fundamental challenge. To achieve 400 miles per hour required enormous power. The most powerful engine available was Pratt & Whitney's new R-2800 double Wasp, a massive 18-cylinder radial engine producing 2,000 horsepower. But that engine was huge, 52 inches in diameter, over 2,300 pounds dry weight. Mounting such a massive engine would require a propeller over 13 feet in diameter to absorb all that power efficiently. A 13-foot propeller on a carrier fighter created an impossible problem. Carrier aircraft needed high ground clearance for propeller tips during the tail-down landing attitude on carrier decks. With conventional landing gear, achieving adequate propeller clearance with a 13-foot propeller would require landing gear so tall the aircraft would be unstable and difficult to handle. Beisel's solution was brilliant and controversial. The inverted gull wing, by bending the wing downward from the fuselage before angling upward to the wingtips, Beisel created space for shorter, stronger landing gear while maintaining propeller clearance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The design was aerodynamically efficient. The wing root joined the fuselage at 90 degrees, minimizing drag. The landing gear could be shorter and stronger. The massive propeller had adequate clearance. The distinctive gull wing would become the Corsair's most recognizable feature. On May 29, 1940, the prototype XF4U-1 took off from Stratford, Connecticut for its first flight. Test. Pilot Lyman Bullard Jr. immediately recognized he was flying something extraordinary. The power was overwhelming. The R-2800 engine pulled the aircraft through the air with authority no pilot had experienced before. Acceleration was brutal. Climb rate was phenomenal. Top speed exceeded 400 miles per hour on the first flight, but problems emerged quickly. The aircraft was difficult to land. Forward visibility was terrible due to the long nose. The cockpit was positioned too far back. Stall characteristics were dangerous. The landing gear was too stiff, causing the aircraft to bounce on carrier decks. For 2 years, Vought engineers worked to fix the Corsair's problems while the Navy grew increasingly frustrated. Early production aircraft went to Marine Corps squadrons based on land airfields rather than carrier squadrons. The Navy temporarily abandoned carrier operations with the Corsair in favor of the smaller, more docile Grumman F-6F Hellcat. The Marines didn't care about carrier compatibility. They needed a fighter that could outperform Japanese aircraft and survive the brutal combat of the Solomon Islands campaign. On February 13, 1943, Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF 124, arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal with the first operational Corsairs in the Pacific Theater. The squadron was led by Major William Gies Jr., a hard-charging officer who believed in aggressive tactics and maximum firepower. His pilots were young, most with minimal combat experience, but they were about to revolutionize air combat in the Pacific. The Japanese pilots they would face had years of combat experience. They flew the legendary Mitsubishi A6 M0, an aircraft that had dominated the skies over Asia and the Pacific since 1940. The Zero could outmaneuver any Allied fighter. It could climb faster than most opponents. It was flown by pilots with thousands of hours of experience. Japanese naval aviation doctrine emphasized dogfighting, tight turns, and exploitation of the Zero's superior maneuverability. The first major engagement came on February 14, 1944, when VMF 124 escorted bombers to Kahili Airfield near Bougainville. Approximately 50 Japanese fighters intercepted the formation. The Marine Corsair pilots had been drilled on specific tactics. Never attempt to dogfight a Zero. Never try to outturn Japanese fighters. Use speed and power. Dive from altitude, make a single firing pass, then extend away using superior speed before climbing back to altitude for another attack. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh dove his Corsair from 20,000 feet at a formation of Zeros climbing to intercept. The R-2800 engine roared as Walsh pushed the throttle to war emergency power. Water injection kicked in, boosting power output to over 2,800 horsepower. The Corsair accelerated to over 450 miles per hour in the dive. Walsh's 650 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, converged at 300 yards. The gun sight picture was perfect. He pressed the trigger. The Zero disintegrated under a stream of armor-piercing incendiary rounds. Walsh pulled out of the dive and extended away to the south. The surviving Zeros attempted to pursue but were left behind as if they were flying in reverse. Walsh climbed back to altitude, positioned for another attack. The same tactic: dive, shoot, extend, climb, repeat. By the end of the engagement, Marine Corsair pilots claimed 18 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of 2 Corsairs. The exchange ratio shocked Japanese commanders. The engagement demonstrated principles that would define Corsair tactics for the rest of the war. Speed was king. Energy management was critical. Boom and zoom attacks exploited the Corsair's strengths while negating the Zero's advantages. The R-2800 engine was the key to all of it. The Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp was a masterpiece of American engineering. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows of 9, 45.9-liter displacement, 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger, 4 valves per cylinder, direct fuel, injection, weight-to-power ratio better than any radial engine in production. The designation R-2800 indicated the engine's displacement in cubic inches, 2,804 cubic inches precisely. The double Wasp produced 2,000 horsepower at takeoff power without water injection. With war emergency power and water methanol injection, power output exceeded 2,800 horsepower for short periods. The water injection system was elegantly simple. A mixture of 50% water and 50% methanol was injected into the fuel-air mixture entering the cylinders. The water absorbed heat, preventing detonation and allowing higher manifold pressures. The methanol added its own energy to combustion. The result was a 30% increase in power output for up to 5 minutes. The system carried 20 gallons of water-methanol mixture. At maximum flow rate, this provided approximately 15 minutes of war emergency power. Pilots learned to use it judiciously. Short bursts during combat, climbing to attack altitude, extending away from enemy fighters. The supercharger was equally sophisticated. 2 stages of compression, 2 speeds for each stage. This allowed the engine to maintain high power output from sea level to over 25,000 feet. The first stage compressed incoming air. The second stage compressed it further. Between stages, an intercooler reduced air temperature, increasing density. At altitude, where atmospheric pressure was low, the supercharger made the difference between adequate power and dominant performance. At 25,000 feet, the R-2800s still produced over 1,600 horsepower. Japanese radial engines of comparable size produced less than 1,200 horsepower at the same altitude. The Corsair maintained performance at high altitude where Japanese fighters struggled. This altitude advantage allowed American pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. Dive from above, attack with speed. Extend away before the enemy could respond. Reliability was the R-2800's most important characteristic. The engine ran smoothly hour after hour. Maintenance requirements were manageable even under primitive field conditions. The engine could absorb battle damage and continue running. Stories circulated of Corsairs returning to base with multiple cylinders shot out but still flying on remaining cylinders. The R-2800 powered not just the Corsair, but also the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, the Douglas A-26 Invader, and numerous other aircraft. Over 125,000 R-2800 engines were manufactured during World War II. The production volume testified to the design's effectiveness and reliability. By mid-1944, Marine Corsair squadrons had refined their tactics to near perfection. The thatch weave, developed by Navy Commander John S. Thatch, was adapted for Corsair operations. 2 aircraft flew as a team, weaving back and forth. If an enemy fighter pursued one Corsair, the other would reverse and position for a shot at the enemy's tail. The superior speed and power of the Corsair made the tactic devastatingly effective. Japanese pilots attempting to pursue one Corsair would suddenly find another Corsair diving on them from an unexpected angle. The combination of teamwork and aircraft performance proved nearly impossible to counter. Major Gregory Pappy Boyington, commander of VMF 214, the famous Black Sheep Squadron, flew the Corsair to 28 confirmed victories before being shot down himself in January 1944. His tactics emphasized aggressive use of the Corsair's power. Maintain altitude advantage. Dive with maximum speed. Make a single high-speed firing pass. Extend away while climbing. Reposition for another attack. Never slow down. Never turn with a zero. Always use speed and power. The statistics compiled by Marine Corsair squadrons were remarkable. From February 1943 through August 1945, Marine Corps F4U units were credited with 2,140 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. Marine Corsair losses totaled approximately 189 aircraft in air-to-air combat. The exchange ratio was better than 11-1. By comparison, the zero-equipped Japanese squadrons facing Marine Corsairs achieved roughly 1-11 ratio. The performance difference was crushing. First Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 became the highest-scoring Corsair pilot, with 25 confirmed victories in just 6 weeks of combat, before being killed in February 1944. His tactics were standard for Corsair pilots. Use altitude, use speed. Never fight fair. always maintain energy advantage. The Corsair's effectiveness was not limited to air-to-air combat. The aircraft carried up to 4,000 pounds of bombs or 8 5-inch rockets. As a fighter bomber, the Corsair excelled at close air support, attacking Japanese positions, bunkers, and shipping. The R-2800 engine provided the power needed to carry heavy loads while maintaining performance. During the Okinawa campaign from April through June 1945, Corsairs flew thousands of close air support sorties. Pilots would orbit offshore stations, waiting for calls from ground controllers. When Japanese positions were identified, Corsairs would roll in, deliver rockets or bombs with devastating accuracy, then strafe with 650 caliber machine guns. The firepower was overwhelming. Each 50 caliber gun fired 400 rounds per minute. 6 guns combined delivered 2,400 rounds per minute. Each round was a half-inch diameter armor-piercing incendiary projectile traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The Corsair's guns could destroy light armor, tear apart buildings, shred aircraft on the ground, and inflict catastrophic damage on any unarmored target. Japanese soldiers learned to fear the sound of Corsair engines. The distinctive howl of the R-2800 became known as the whistling death because of the sound created by air rushing through the engine cooling intakes during high-speed dives. By 1945, the Navy had finally solved the Corsair's carrier landing problems. Modifications to the landing gear, improved pilot training, and changes to approach procedures made carrier operations practical. Fleet squadrons began receiving Corsairs in numbers. The F4U became the Navy's primary fighter bomber for the remainder of the war. British Royal Navy squadrons also operated Corsairs from carriers in the Pacific. They praised the aircraft's performance, firepower, and durability. The modifications made by British engineers to improve carrier compatibility were later adopted by American manufacturers. The final accounting of Corsair combat effectiveness painted a clear picture. Over 12,500 F4U Corsairs were manufactured. They equipped 42 Marine squadrons, numerous Navy squadrons, and British Commonwealth units. In combat, Corsairs destroyed over 2,140 Japanese aircraft, while losing fewer than 200 inches air-to-air combat. The exchange ratio exceeded 10-1. Mission success rates exceeded 90%. Aircraft availability rates remained high despite primitive maintenance conditions. The fundamental lesson was clear. Superior power, properly applied, wins fights. The R-2800 engine gave the Corsair power that Japanese fighters could not match. Marine and Navy pilots learned tactics that exploited that power advantage. The result was air superiority that contributed directly to Allied victory in the Pacific. For Japanese pilots facing Corsairs, the experience was traumatic. Their tactics, developed over years of combat, no longer worked. Trying to dogfight a Corsair was suicide. The American fighter was faster in dives, faster in climbs, faster in level flight, and could sustain higher speeds in turns without stalling. The only advantage the Zero retained was instantaneous turn rate at low speeds. But Corsair pilots never allowed combat to slow to the speeds where the Zero's maneuverability mattered. They dictated the terms of engagement. They fought on their terms, using their strengths, negating Japanese advantages. The shock that Lieutenant Commander Tanimizu experienced over Rabaul in February 1944 was replicated thousands of times across the Pacific theater. Japanese pilots encountered an aircraft they could not match, flown by pilots who refused to fight on Japanese terms, supported by logistics and maintenance that kept aircraft operational. The demoralization was systematic and complete. The R-2800 engine's influence extended far beyond World War II. Post-war, the engine powered early jets as turboprops in aircraft like the Grumman F-8F Bearcat and Douglas A-1 Skyraider. It remained in production into the 1,960 seconds. Modern estimates suggest over 125,000 R-2800 engines were built, more than any other large aircraft engine in history. The Corsair itself continued serving in frontline units through the Korean War. Marine Corsair squadrons flew close air support missions throughout the conflict. The aircraft's load-carrying capacity, firepower, and durability made it ideal for ground attack missions. Some nations operated Corsairs into the 1,960 seconds. For the men who designed the R-2800, the wartime production was vindication of their engineering excellence. Pratt and Whitney's design team, led by George Meade, had created an engine that combined high power output, excellent reliability, manageable maintenance requirements, and sufficient durability to survive combat damage. The 18-cylinder layout, the two-stage supercharger, the water injection system, every design choice proved correct under the most demanding operational conditions. For the Corsair pilots who flew combat missions over the Pacific, the R-2800 engine was more than machinery. It was the source of their confidence, the foundation of their tactics, the reason they survived when so many others did not. When a pilot pushed the throttle forward and felt 2,800 horsepower surge through the aircraft, when the Corsair accelerated away from pursuing enemies as if they were standing still, when climbs and dives were executed with power to spare, trust was absolute. The engine ran when it was supposed to run. It produced power when power was needed. It brought pilots home. That reliability under combat conditions was the ultimate measure of engineering success. The legacy of the Corsair and its R-2800 engine lives on in aviation history. The aircraft is remembered as one of the finest fighters of World War II. The distinctive gull wing design is instantly recognizable. The combat record speaks for itself. More than 2,100 enemy aircraft destroyed, exchange ratios exceeding 10-1. Service that extended from 1,943 through the 1,960 seconds. The R-2800 engine is studied in engineering schools as an example of excellent design. Students learn about supercharging, water injection, and thermal management by examining the double Wasp's systems. The principles established by Pratt and Whitney's engineers remain relevant for modern power plant design. For Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanimizu, the moment he watched that dark blue Corsair accelerate away from his Zero marked the beginning of his personal recognition that Japan was losing the war. The technological gap was too wide. The industrial capacity differential was too great. The American ability to produce aircraft with 2,800 horsepower engines in numbers sufficient to equip entire squadrons demonstrated a level of capability that Japan could not match. That realization, repeated thousands of times across the Pacific as Japanese pilots encountered Corsairs, Hellcats, and Thunderbolts, corroded morale and destroyed confidence. When your best fighter is outclassed by enemy aircraft that appear in ever-increasing numbers, when your tactics no longer work, when survival becomes a matter of luck rather than skill, hope dies. The death of hope among Japanese pilots contributed as much to Allied victory as any specific battle or campaign. The Corsair and its R-2800 engine represented the intersection of excellent design, sound engineering, quality production, adequate resources, and effective tactics. That combination proved unstoppable. Japanese pilots were brave. Japanese aircraft were sophisticated in their own way. Japanese tactical doctrine was based on real combat experience. None of it mattered when confronting an enemy with overwhelming technical and numerical superiority. The lesson applies beyond World War II. In conflicts between industrial powers, victory goes to the side that can produce better equipment in greater quantities and employ it effectively. The F4U Corsair, powered by the R-2800 double Wasp engine, was proof of that principle. An aircraft that started as a troubled design with carrier compatibility problems was transformed into one of the war's most effective fighters. The transformation was made possible by one factor above all others: power. 2,800 horsepower when it was needed most. Power that gave Marine and Navy pilots the ability to control engagements, dictate tactics, and survive combat. The whistling death had arrived in the Pacific skies. Japanese pilots heard it coming and knew their advantage was gone. The age of the Zero had ended. The era of American air superiority had begun. The Corsair, driven by the unstoppable force of the R-2800 engine, made it so. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The transformation of the Corsair from a promising but problematic design into the Pacific's most feared fighter bomber required more than just the R-2800 engine's raw power. It demanded systematic refinement of every component, relentless testing under combat conditions, and the development of tactics that maximized strengths while minimizing weaknesses. By June 1944, Vought engineers had incorporated over 400 design modifications to address issues identified in combat. The cockpit was raised 7 inches, dramatically improving forward visibility during landing approach. The tail wheel was lengthened and made fully castering, reducing bounce tendency on carrier decks. The stall warning system was improved with a stall strip on the wing leading edge that ensured the wing root stalled before the wingtips, maintaining aileron control during stall recovery. These modifications transformed carrier landing characteristics. What had been a dangerous, unforgiving aircraft became manageable for properly trained pilots. The Navy's decision to finally accept the Corsair for carrier operations in April 1944 validated years of engineering refinement. USS Essex and USS Intrepid received the first carrier-based Corsair squadrons. Pilots who had trained extensively in the modified F4U variant found the aircraft's landing characteristics acceptable, though never easy. The Corsair demanded respect. The long nose still blocked forward view during the landing approach. Pilots learned to approach in a continuous turn until just before touchdown, maintaining visual contact with the deck throughout. The powerful engine created significant torque that had to be countered with rudder input. The landing gear was stiff, requiring precise speed control to avoid bouncing. But the performance advantages made the demanding handling characteristics worth mastering. Lieutenant Commander Roger Hedrick, commanding officer of VF-84 aboard USS Bunker Hill, became one of the Navy's leading Corsair advocates. His squadron transitioned from F-6F Hellcats to F4U-1Ds in early 1945. Hedrick drilled his pilots mercilessly on carrier landing technique. The accident rate during initial qualification was concerning, but declined rapidly as pilots gained experience. Within 2 months, VF-84's landing safety record matched that of Hellcat squadrons. What set the Corsair apart was performance. Hedrick's pilots could reach combat altitude faster than Hellcat squadrons. They could chase down fleeing Japanese aircraft that Hellcats couldn't catch. They could carry heavier bomb loads while retaining fighter performance. The R-2800 engine's power margin meant a Corsair with 2,000 pounds of bombs still outperformed most enemy fighters. The kamikaze threat that emerged in late 1944 demanded exactly the capabilities the Corsair provided. Japanese suicide aircraft approached at high speed and low altitude, requiring defending fighters to intercept quickly with maximum speed advantage. Corsairs could dive from combat air patrol altitude at over 450 miles per hour, close rapidly on kamikaze aircraft, and destroy them before they reached the fleet. On the 6th of April 1945, during Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, over 350 kamikaze aircraft attacked the American fleet in a coordinated mass assault called Kikusui No. 1. Corsair pilots from multiple carriers intercepted the raid in a running battle that lasted 4 hours. Lieutenant Philip Kirkwood of VF-10 from USS Intrepid personally destroyed 4 kamikaze aircraft in a single sortie, using the Corsair's speed to reposition rapidly between targets. The engagement demonstrated the Corsair's effectiveness as a fleet defender. Speed allowed quick interception. 650 caliber machine guns provided devastating firepower. The R-2800 engine's reliability meant aircraft returned to carriers repeatedly for rearming and refueling, then launched again for additional combat air patrol. Some pilots flew 4 sorties in a single day. The Corsair's durability under such intensive operations proved exceptional. Japanese pilots attempting kamikaze missions learned to fear the distinctive gull wing silhouette. American radio intercepts recorded Japanese controllers warning incoming suicide aircraft about the bent wing fighters. Some kamikaze pilots jettisoned their bombs and attempted to escape when Corsairs were spotted. The psychological advantage had become absolute. The Corsair's effectiveness as a fighter-bomber reached peak efficiency during the Okinawa campaign. Close air support missions required aircraft to loiter over the battlefield, ready to respond to ground controller requests. The Corsair could carry 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets plus full ammunition for its 6 machine guns, maintain station for over an hour, then deliver ordnance with precision before returning to the carrier. Marine Corsair squadrons, operating from Kadena Airfield on Okinawa itself, flew up to 6 sorties per day per aircraft. Pilots would brief, launch, locate targets marked by ground controllers with colored smoke, attack with rockets and bombs, strafe with machine guns, return to rearm and refuel, then launch again within 30 minutes. The operational tempo was punishing. Ground crews worked 18-hour days maintaining aircraft. Pilots flew until exhausted, then flew again. The R-2800 engine's reliability under such conditions was remarkable. Engines routinely exceeded 400 hours between major overhauls. Compare this to Japanese radial engines of similar size that required major maintenance after 150 hours. American logistics provided spare parts, lubricants, and maintenance equipment. Japanese logistics collapsed under submarine and air attack. The sustainability advantage amplified the technical advantage. First Lieutenant Robert Wade of VMF 323 described the engine's reliability in his diary. "We push these engines beyond redline regularly. War emergency power, maximum manifold pressure, high RPM, sustained for minutes. The damn things just keep running. After a mission, the engine is hot enough to cook on. We let it cool, check the oil, replace spark plugs if needed, refuel, and it starts on the first try. Every time. That reliability means everything out here." The summer of 1945 brought the war to Japan's doorstep. Carrier task forces operated within 100 miles of the Japanese coast, launching massive strikes against airfields, factories, and military installations. Corsairs flew sweep missions ahead of bomber strikes, attempting to clear Japanese fighters from the sky. Opposition had decreased dramatically, but remaining Japanese pilots fought with desperate courage. On the 24th of July 1945, Lieutenant Commander John Billow of VF 87 from USS Ticonderoga led a sweep over Nagoya. His division of 4 Corsairs encountered 8 Japanese fighters attempting to defend local factories. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. All 8 Japanese aircraft were destroyed without loss. Billow described the fight as almost unfair. "They tried to turn with us. Huge mistake. Even in a turn, we maintained enough speed to keep them in our gun sights. They were slow, we were fast. They were maneuverable, but that didn't matter because we controlled the engagement geometry." The final statistics from Pacific combat operations illustrated Corsair dominance mathematically. Marine Corps Corsair squadrons flew over 64,000 combat sorties. They destroyed 2,140 enemy aircraft in air combat, with losses of 189 aircraft in air-to-air combat, an exchange ratio of 11.3 to 1. Navy carrier-based Corsair squadrons added approximately 1,000 additional air-to-air victories. Combined Marine and Navy Corsairs destroyed over 3,100 enemy aircraft while losing approximately 230 inches air combat. But aerial victories told only part of the story. Corsairs destroyed over 1,200 Japanese aircraft on the ground during strafing attacks. They sank or damaged hundreds of ships with bombs and rockets. They demolished thousands of buildings, bunkers, and fortifications during close air support missions. The versatility made possible by the R-2800 engine's power allowed the Corsair to excel in multiple roles simultaneously. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 ended the war before a planned invasion of Japan became necessary. But Corsairs were ready. Marine squadrons had moved to Okinawa specifically to support invasion operations. Pilots had been briefed on their missions: continuous close air support for landing forces, interdiction of Japanese reinforcements, and elimination of kamikaze threats. The R-2800 powered Corsairs would have been at the forefront of the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. When Japan surrendered on the 15th of August 1945, Corsair pilots had mixed feelings: relief that the killing had ended, pride in their accomplishments, recognition that they had flown the finest fighter-bomber of the Pacific War. The Corsairs' dominance was complete, undeniable, and permanently recorded in combat statistics that spoke for themselves. Post-war analysis by both American and Japanese military historians confirmed what pilots had known in combat. The Corsair represented a quantum leap in fighter capability. The R-2800 engine provided power that Japanese engineers couldn't match with their available technology and resources. American pilots exploited that power advantage with tactics specifically designed around the Corsair's strengths. For Pratt and Whitney, the R-2800's war record validated decades of engineering development. The double Wasp had powered America's finest fighters to victory. It had proven reliable under the most demanding conditions. It had performed flawlessly when pilots needed it most. The legacy of the R-2800 extended far beyond World War II, powering aircraft for another 2 decades. The Corsair itself became a legend. Marine Corps pilots who flew it called it the best fighter bomber ever built. Navy pilots praised its performance and versatility. Even British Royal Navy pilots, initially skeptical of American equipment, became strong advocates after flying combat missions in Corsairs. The aircraft that Japanese pilots called Whistling Death had earned its fearsome reputation through superior engineering, overwhelming power, and effective employment. The F4U Corsair, driven by 2,800 horsepower from the magnificent R-2800 double Wasp engine, had changed the outcome of the Pacific War and set new standards for fighter aircraft design that influenced decades of subsequent development. The end of World War II in August 1945 did not end the Corsair's combat career. While most wartime aircraft were quickly retired to storage or scrapped, the F4U remained in frontline service with both the Navy and Marine Corps. The reasons were simple. No replacement aircraft offered better performance. The R-2800 engine remained supremely reliable, and the Corsair's versatility as a fighter bomber made it indispensable for the missions America's military needed to fly. By 1950, when North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea, the Corsair was still the Marine Corps' primary fighter bomber. VMF 214, the legendary Black Sheep Squadron, and VMF 323, the Death Rattlers, deployed to Korea equipped with the latest F4U4 and F4U5 variants. These aircraft featured refined R-2800 engines producing up to 2,450 horsepower continuously, with war emergency power reaching 2,850 horsepower. The Korean War presented different challenges than the Pacific War. Enemy fighters were no longer Zeros but MiG-15 jets, capable of speeds exceeding 650 miles per hour. The Corsair could not match jet performance in air-to-air combat. Instead, Marine Corsair squadrons focused on their proven strength, close air support, and interdiction. The missions required carrying heavy ordnance loads to targets in mountainous terrain, delivering weapons accurately in all weather conditions, and surviving intense ground fire. Captain Jesse Folmar of VMF 312 flew his first combat mission over Korea on the 3rd of August 1950, less than 6 weeks after the war began. The target was a bridge near Seoul held by North Korean forces. Folmar's Corsair carried 2 1,000-pound bombs, 6 5-inch rockets, and full ammunition for all 6 machine guns. Total ordnance load exceeded 3,000 pounds. Despite the weight, the R-2800 engine pulled the aircraft off the runway with power to spare. The attack run required diving from 8,000 feet to release altitude at 1,500 feet while maintaining enough speed to avoid a ground fire. Folmar pushed the throttle to war emergency power, rolled inverted, and pulled through into a 60-degree dive. The Corsair accelerated past 400 miles per hour. The target bridge filled his gun sight. He released both bombs at 2,000 feet, pulled hard into a climbing turn, and felt the aircraft shake as the bombs detonated behind him. One span of the bridge collapsed into the river. Mission successful. What made the Corsair effective in Korea was the same characteristic that had made it deadly in the Pacific: power. The R-2800 engine allowed the aircraft to carry ordnance loads that would have grounded lesser fighters. A Corsair, with 3,000 pounds of external stores, still flew well enough to evade ground fire and return safely to base. The engine's reliability meant aircraft could fly multiple sorties per day without mechanical issues. Marine squadrons operated from primitive airfields in conditions that would have grounded many aircraft: pierced steel planking runways, minimal maintenance facilities, extreme cold in winter, choking dust in summer. The R-2800 engine ran reliably in temperatures ranging from -20 degrees Fahrenheit to +100 degrees. Oil systems functioned properly. Fuel systems delivered consistent flow. Ignition systems fired reliably despite temperature extremes. Ground crews performed miracles of maintenance under impossible conditions. Technical Sergeant William Martinez of VMF 323 described the challenges. "We maintained these engines in the open, in all weather. No heated hangars, no proper tools half the time. We improvised, we adapted, and the engines kept running. I saw engines with 500 hours since major overhaul still performing perfectly." The R-2800 was built to take abuse and keep working. The close air support missions flown by Corsairs in Korea were among the most dangerous of the war. Forward air controllers on the ground would identify targets, often within 100 yards of friendly positions. Corsair pilots would roll in, deliver ordnance with precision, then circle for another attack if needed. The accuracy required was extreme. The margin for error was zero. Hitting the wrong position could kill American or South Korean soldiers. Major Kenneth Roycer of VMF 214 became the most decorated Marine aviator of the Korean War, earning 2 Navy Crosses for close air support missions flown under intense fire. On the 4th of September 1950, Roycer led a division of 4 Corsairs supporting Marines trapped on a ridgeline near Pusan. North Korean forces had surrounded the position and were preparing a final assault. Roycer's Corsairs arrived overhead with minutes to spare. The forward air controller marked enemy positions with smoke grenades barely 50 yards from the trapped Marines. Roycer rolled in first, diving at the enemy line. His 650 caliber machine guns tore into North Korean positions, raking the hillside with devastating fire. He pulled up, circled, and made a second run with rockets. The other 3 Corsairs followed, each making multiple passes until all ordnance was expended. The North Korean assault broke. The Marines were saved. Roycer's aircraft had taken multiple hits from ground fire, but the R-2800 engine ran smoothly on the flight back to base. Mechanics counted 14 bullet holes in the aircraft, including 3 that had penetrated the engine cowling. None had caused critical damage. The engine's robust construction meant it could absorb battle damage that would have destroyed less durable power plants. The interdiction missions targeting North Korean and Chinese supply lines were equally dangerous. Pilots flew at low altitude through mountain valleys, searching for trucks, trains, and supply depots. Anti-aircraft fire was intense and accurate. The Communist forces had learned to position automatic weapons along the valleys where aircraft had to fly. Every mission was a gauntlet of tracer fire and exploding shells. Lieutenant Thomas Hudner of VF-32, flying from the carrier, USS Leyte, became famous not for destroying enemy targets but for attempting to rescue a downed fellow pilot. On the 4th of December 1950, Ensign Jesse Brown's Corsair was hit by ground fire and crash-landed in mountainous terrain. Hudner deliberately crash-landed his own Corsair near Brown's aircraft in an attempt to rescue him. Though Brown died of his injuries, Hudner's extraordinary courage earned him the Medal of Honor. The incident illustrated both the Corsair's durability and the devotion pilots felt toward their aircraft and each other. Hudner's Corsair survived a controlled crash landing in rough terrain. The R-2800 engine continued running after impact, providing heat that kept Hudner alive until rescue helicopters arrived. The aircraft's robust construction protected the pilot during the crash. These characteristics, designed into the Corsair from the beginning, saved lives repeatedly throughout the Korean War. By 1951, Marine Corsair squadrons had established complete air superiority over the battlefield. North Korean and Chinese fighters rarely challenged American air power. When MiG-15 seconds did venture south, they targeted high-altitude B-29 bombers, avoiding the lower altitudes where Corsairs operated. The few encounters between Corsairs and MiG-15 seconds demonstrated that while the jet was faster, the Corsair remained a dangerous opponent in the hands of a skilled pilot. On the 10th of September 1952, Captain Jesse Folmar encountered 4 MiG-15 seconds while flying close air support near Pyongyang. The jets dove on his division from altitude, attempting a single high-speed pass before escaping. Folmar had been flying Corsairs for 7 years. He knew his aircraft's capabilities intimately. As the MiGs dove, Folmar pulled his Corsair into a tight climbing turn, using the R-2800s power to maintain speed in the vertical. The lead MiG overshot, unable to match the Corsair's sustained turn rate at lower speeds. Folmar reversed, positioned behind the jet, and opened fire with all 6 machine guns. The MiG exploded. The remaining jets fled. Folmar had achieved what aviation experts considered impossible. A propeller-driven fighter had destroyed a jet aircraft in air-to-air combat. The victory was credited to pilot skill, but it was enabled by the R-2800 engine's power that allowed energy management impossible with less powerful engines. The statistics compiled during the Korean War demonstrated the Corsair's continued effectiveness. Marine Corsair squadrons flew over 80,000 combat sorties. They delivered over 15,000 tons of ordnance. They destroyed thousands of vehicles, hundreds of buildings, dozens of bridges, and countless other targets. Aircraft losses totaled approximately 250 Corsairs, most to ground fire rather than enemy aircraft. The combat loss rate of roughly 0.3% per sortie was acceptable given the dangerous nature of low-altitude strike missions. The R-2800 engine's reliability remained exceptional throughout the Korean War. Engine failure rates were less than 1% per 1,000 flight hours. Most failures were minor issues that allowed pilots to return safely to base. Catastrophic engine failures resulting in aircraft loss were rare. The reliability validated decades of engineering refinement and quality production. As the Korean War ended in July 1953, the Corsair's frontline career was finally drawing to a close. Jet aircraft were replacing propeller fighters throughout the world's air forces. The age of the piston engine fighter was ending. But the Corsair's service was not finished. The aircraft found new life in other nations' air forces and in specialized roles where its unique capabilities remained valuable. The French Navy operated Corsairs from carriers during the First Indochina War against Viet Minh forces. Argentine Navy Corsairs served through the 1,960 seconds. The Honduran Air Force flew combat missions in 1969 during the brief football war against El Salvador, making the Corsair one of the last piston engine fighters to see actual combat. In American service, specialized variants continued flying into the late 1,950 seconds. The AU-1, a ground attack variant specifically designed for the Korean War, featured increased armor protection and ordnance carrying capacity. The F4U-7, the final production variant, was built for the French Navy and featured yet another upgraded R-2800 engine. Production finally ended in December 1952 with the delivery of the last F4U-7 to France. Total production reached 12,571 aircraft over a production run lasting from 1,942 to 1,952. For the engineers at Pratt & Whitney who had designed the R-2800 double Wasp engine, the decades of successful service represented the highest possible validation. The engine had powered America's finest fighters through 2 wars. It had proven reliable under every conceivable operating condition. It had brought pilots home when other engines would have failed. The R-2800's production total exceeded 125,000 engines, making it one of the most successful aircraft engines in history. The legacy of the Corsair and its R-2800 engine extends beyond combat statistics and production numbers. The aircraft influenced a generation of fighter design. The inverted gull wing became iconic. The emphasis on power and performance over maneuverability changed tactical thinking. The successful integration of fighter and bomber roles in a single airframe established a design philosophy that continues today. Modern fighter bombers like the F-15E Strike Eagle and F/A-18 Super Hornet trace their conceptual lineage to the Corsair. They combine air superiority capability with ground attack effectiveness. They carry heavy ordnance loads while maintaining fighter performance. They excel in multiple roles simultaneously. The Corsair demonstrated these characteristics were achievable and desirable. For the pilots who flew Corsairs in combat, the aircraft remains the finest they ever flew. The distinctive whistle of the R-2800 engine, the solid feel of the controls, the overwhelming power available at the touch of a throttle, the confidence that the machine would perform when needed. These memories remain vivid decades after the last combat sortie. The F4U Corsair, powered by the legendary R-2800 double Wasp engine producing 2,800 horsepower, earned its place in aviation history through combat effectiveness, versatility, and longevity. From the skies over the Solomon Islands in 1943 to the mountains of Korea in 1953, the Corsair and its magnificent engine proved that superior power, properly applied, wins wars.